sometimes they'd have assignments where it'd just be like we read some stories in class and you'd have to write an essay writing about like kind of what the story contributed to kind of overall what the Grimm brothers were trying to go for. After that assignment, like going into class and the teacher talking about like, oh, yeah, a ton of you got in trouble because we caught you using ChatGPT. Because very interestingly, when people try to use it for writing, it has a certain syntax it tends to respond in. It always restates the topic and always just kind of like gives you a very kind of cookie cutter answer.
Yeah.
Because obviously in like a class where we're doing a more deeper analysis, you're going to have to give more specifics other than just like a general overview of the story. And one would think you probably could get away with doing that if you just took what like you generated and did some minor edits. But at the same time, if a person's already kind of trying to get out of writing an assignment using AI, I don't expect them to really have the patience to use that minor bit of effort.
Right.
But I don't know. I just kind of wrote it. I just read the story and I did fine.
All right, hey everyone, my name is Dulf Vincent Genis. I am back here at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning here at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Today I am joined here with Aseem.
Hi, my name is Aseem Patra. I'm a senior majoring in statistics, minoring in computer science.
And I'm also here with Ava.
Hi, I'm Ava Marginean. I'm a senior majoring in political science, concentrating in international relations.
Awesome. It's great to have you guys here today. So just to kind of open up the floor, let's start a little bit with kind of you guys' interactions with the AI. So anything AI related you guys have either done in the space of in education. So how have you kind of used it in your academia? We can start a little bit with Aseem.
Yeah, in academia, I'd say I don't use it directly that much because like most of what I do is more like math straight up, and it's better to just kind of do it like on paper. But I know sometimes for some classes where there's a bit more of a programming aspect and it's something I'm not as familiar with, I've sometimes tried to use it as like a baseline. Like, okay, I'm trying to do this. How would like I start? Because everything's going to be so specific anyway.
Yeah.
Though I'll say in my experience, usually you really have to coach it to try to get anything useful. Because I've also tried using it to like help out with my job.
Yeah.
Whenever it's like wording something a bit new. And a lot of the times it's like I'm asking like, oh, I want to try this. And half the time I have to correct it like, oh, that causes this error. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's actually this.
Right.
It's like, well, okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. General things for AI on your side, Ava?
Yeah, so I think in the social sciences, at least in classes, I know a lot of people who use AI to do responses and stuff like that. I tend to not. I've had assignments actually where my professor has asked us to have AI write us a paragraph to compare it to like what something we would write is to understand how AI has its shortcomings, especially when it comes to citing sources. Most recently, though, I did use AI a lot in my final project this semester, my capstone for the Global Leaders Program. Because I wrote a picture book series on human-centered design, and I am not an artist. So I did a sample drawing online that I just like traced and did the shading myself, and I used that as a baseline image. And then I used ChatGPT and Adobe AI image generator to generate images based on that in a similar style for the rest of the illustrations in the book.
Yes.
I personally don't really like using AI though beyond that. I write and I've like been like, oh, write like a new verse for this song just to see. And it kind of creeped me out how like specific it was. And I just really didn't like it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you said that's a class that you were using AI for the picture book.
Yeah, it's for LAS 399, my capstone class for the Global Leaders Program, which is a program in LAS that's half international students, half domestic students.
Okay.
It's a 4-year program. And we basically learn about human-centered design, apply it, consult with companies and RSOs, and work through the human-centered design process, which is basically a 5-step problem-solving process that puts humans and the people that you're trying to help at the center of solving the problems.
Okay, and your professor has been pretty open to the idea of you guys using AI in that class?
Yeah, when we're using it, how he phrases it is like when we're using it for like ideation purposes, or for stuff that's like, okay, like time constraints, like the images stuff, I'm going to be citing that it's ChatGPT and Adobe that created it. And then he uses it a lot for helping him come up with ideas. So like titles for things, or just helping to start in the brainstorming process.
Yeah.
So as long as it's not like strict like ideas that you need to be coming up with on your own for like a reflection assignment or stuff like that, he's pretty open to the use of AI in class.
Have you found that experience, Aseem, where your professors have been lenient or open to that using AI, or has it just, especially with it being programming on your end because statistics is becoming increasingly computational? I don't know what your experience has been on that end.
I think in classes they're usually not for it, but also it's one of those things where if you try to use it, like especially for assignment, you're just going to suffer for it once like an actual exam comes up because you're not going to have it there. I remember this wasn't for like a statistics class, but I remember I took a class about Grimm fairy tales like a year or two ago. And like sometimes they'd have assignments where it'd just be like we read some stories in class and you'd have to write an essay writing about like kind of what the story contributed to kind of overall what the Grimm brothers were trying to go for with their various like story collections. And I remember like after that assignment, like going into class and the teacher talking about like, oh yeah, a ton of you got in trouble because we caught you using ChatGPT. Because very interestingly, when people try to use it for writing, it has a certain syntax it tends to respond in. So you like most of the time, like at least with like the more basic kind of ChatGPT stuff, if you ask it like write me a thing about this specific topic, it always restates the topic and always just kind of like gives you a very kind of cookie cutter answer.
Yeah.
Because obviously in like a class where we're doing more deeper analysis, you're going to have to give more specifics other than just like a general overview of the story. And one would think you probably could get away with doing that if you just took what like you generated and did some minor edits. But at the same time, if a person's already kind of trying to get out of writing an assignment using AI, I don't expect them to really have the patience to use that minor bit of effort.
Right.
But I don't know. I just kind of wrote it. I just read the story and I did fine.
No, and that's similar to your experience with kind of like using it less, not necessarily less for academia, but more for just like the creative stuff, like ideation and everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. People in classes, like he was saying, people in classes really get caught and they're discouraged from using it for anything that's like answering a question and doing your own in-depth analysis. It does do a really good job summarizing things. So I've used it for like study guides.
Yeah.
Like especially for a lot of my classes, I have to do so much reading. Like I'm doing like 200 pages of reading a week per class. And so by the time the final rolls around, I don't have time to reread like a book basically, or like 2 books honestly per class. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll use like ChatGPT to summarize different sources, and that works really well because then I am giving it the exact source to pull from, so I know that it's not pulling from other places. I'm saying take this source and give me like a 200-word summary. And that I think is a really effective way to use it to study, to kind of cut the time down, but still use it wisely. And no one's ever gonna like, I'm not using it as an assignment or anything. It's just for me personally, so I don't have to reread 1,000 pages or whatever.
Right. Because at the end of the day, sometimes all of it is just fluff. You just need the main idea of a lot of this thing, which ChatGPT does really well. But as well in that case, then how have you guys kind of used it? Then either used it or maybe heard about other people using it in some maybe more beneficial terms, maybe when it regards to academia. You mentioned study guides. Like I like to use it, for example, when, study guides, I'm doing something for a statistics or data science class, and it'll give me like a bunch of study guides to study from. But when I run out of those worksheets, I literally just put it back into ChatGPT and I say, hey, using these study guides or these worksheets, can you generate me more study guides or more worksheets? Have you guys had the experience, or has it just generally been mostly just for us, people using it maliciously for assignments, or maybe in that case?
It's generally that, but I think sometimes it can be useful just to give yourself a bit of a boost. Like I've done some assignments where part of it's like you have to generate your own kind of code output for like analyzing some data, and sometimes it's so many data points just to look at that I want like at least like a starting, like, oh, I want to figure out how I'm gonna like summarize this, because like I've already generated it myself,
right?
So like, because now I think on whatever the free version of ChatGPT is, you can like give it images, and it can kind of do some analysis on it. So I think I've like done that before, where like I send it that just so I can get kind of like a basic overview. But then obviously it's not going to be perfect, so I want to still like look through it, but use that more of like a basis to help out. I think like trying to rely on it is probably, I think people just have too much trust in it. Like everyone in their mind just like goes on it these days. I think it's about like you can use it to maybe help summarize things, but you still have to do the work yourself because it's not like, at least those ones aren't that sophisticated. And like it's also like you're not going to get anything out of it if you just shove something in there, take the output, and call it a day.
No, yeah, definitely. Any beneficial sides on your side, maybe, Ava?
Yeah, I agree. I think that I know people who've used it for like job interview prep or writing emails. I tend to not, especially for the emails, because I feel like I'll just write it myself, and I think that's good practice. I think it is nice when you're not sure where to start somewhere and you need like an idea to get started. But and I know a lot of people who do use it that way.
Yeah.
I also know people who use it because they don't want to do work, which I think is up to that person on whether or not they want to get the benefits of doing the work or not. And whether or not they get caught is also like the onus is on them.
Yeah.
But I've personally never used it for that kind of stuff because I don't know. First of all, it creeps me out sometimes. Like some of the answers it gives, like I don't know. I don't like that something else is doing the thinking for me, I guess. I prefer to do that myself. I like that process. But I also think that in order to learn effectively, you have to be doing that thinking and giving that output yourself. So I think that when you're using it, again, for the idea generation or helping studying or whatever, that cuts down time and makes things in life a little bit easier, especially because I know we're all super busy people, and it really does help to have a little bit of that work taken off. So you're not doing a lot of the busy work per se. But the thinking and the thought process, I think, is extremely important to do on your own.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit about job and recent prep, kind of transitioning a little bit into how AI might affect the workforce, especially with you guys being in such different industries. How have you seen any kind of news about maybe AI? Because especially for statistics, it's very diverse, with statistics being so integral in computer science and math and data science, it seems.
Some things I've learned about is that like a lot of companies, you have like kind of a weird split when it comes to companies where some of them are kind of very much not really shifting it to AI immediately. They're still doing stuff in the more traditional ways they've done. So maybe just like trading around spreadsheets and doing more manual analysis.
Yeah.
Which means that like on one hand, like obviously things aren't going to be as streamlined, but also a lot of AI stuff is a lot more experimental. And like there's like the other side is that a lot of companies, most companies that are into AI are making their own in-house. And so like that's where a lot of jobs are being created just to get people to start creating their own AI that can maybe be more specific to whatever that company's goals are or what like they're trying to output. So I'm not like worried about it on like I think like AI is dominating and going to take over jobs just because I think there's so much work that needs to be done to even get them to do those jobs.
Yeah.
And even then you're still going to want some human oversight because even like a AI that does pretty well, you're still going to want to double check, and like it's good to maybe use as like something to indicate.
Yeah.
So say like you're using, like say like in like fraud or something, say you created like an AI that maybe analyzes some data to look for fraud. You can maybe use that as more of like an alarm rather than something that just automates the whole process, just because it's better to have layers of security when it comes to stuff on that level of like seriousness. So you could like train different AI or models to kind of look for that stuff and then have someone who is qualified to then actually analyze like, oh, is this actually fraud going on?
Right.
I think it's better used as indicators, at least at the moment. There could be a time maybe in the far future where everything can be streamlined.
Yeah.
I don't think we're quite there yet. I think there's a bit more work that needs to be done. A lot of strides have been made, but I think it's still like we're still kind of in that kind of beginning stages of the much more sophisticated ones that maybe could like take over and dominate jobs in the future.
Ava, anything regarding the political science space, even the international relations space, how you maybe see AI, well, there's so many different topics that you go into, but even AI interacting with people from different countries, how it's affected different labor forces, whatever. So talk about whatever you want, but yeah.
Yeah, I think so far AI really hasn't made a dent in the field, honestly. The only places that I could think of it maybe being used is like writing a policy brief or potentially in translating, but for the most part, they want people who actually speak the languages to learn the languages and work on the translations. And the only time that really AI is seen, sometimes with open source intelligence, which is intelligence taken from like social media sources, they'll use AI and codes that do like keyword searches to make the data collection process a little bit quicker, but it's actual people that are doing that behind it. And kind of like Aseem was saying, they're the ones who are actually checking it. It's more of a flag system.
Yeah.
Additionally, I think the other main area that AI is seen is in like deepfakes, and especially of images and then also things that people are saying. So because of the information war, which is just like misinformation on the internet, which foreign governments sometimes do fund their own campaigns to try to influence people in certain ways. So because of that, in the foreign policy realm especially, there's a lot of false information, websites that are designed to look like Fox News or look like CNN, but actually aren't. And if you look at the URL, it's like Fox News dot like some random letters. So it's not actually Fox News, but it looks exactly like it.
Yeah.
So a lot of misinformation in that respect. Deep fakes, especially with the Ukraine-Russia war and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There were a lot of fake images of like missiles and different things like that, or even images taken from other conflicts.
No, right. It's just like a new form of propaganda, basically.
Exactly. It basically influences a lot of the propaganda, which is why it's really important to fact check. But because of that, it's not really being used a lot. The government, the U.S. government especially, is notorious for taking forever to update on everything, including like websites, everything, intelligence. So I can't speak to the inner workings of it because I don't know, because it's all classified. But in that respect, because it takes so long to update, I don't anticipate it being a huge part of it for a long time. The government might have some secret projects we don't know about, but generally speaking, that's how we see it, like in the news and in the open realm of foreign policy.
Yeah, and so far from what you've seen, like has it like, because you actually touched on a little bit about my studies, which is the information science, talking about how AI affects society, talking about information, how it's being consumed by the media or the public. But just in general, in that realm, have you seen it? Have you seen like any maybe good effects of AI being used? Because of course you mentioned like AI is not necessarily being used in one good way or another, because at the end of the day, people just want to hear like a human voice when, for example, translating, because you speak multiple languages. So any kind of news on that end, I guess?
I guess no. I feel like most of the stuff that when it's talked about is mostly the negative stuff and the propaganda. I think more positively, we might see it come more into like research. And when you look at international relations research, because that's where like the statistics and the calculus aspect of that comes into play. So using AI and supercomputers to calculate like the odds that a war is going to happen, for example, but they are still so inaccurate. The most accurate supercomputer right now, I think, for using like Fearon's bargaining equation, which is one of the ways of modeling whether or not like what goes into whether or not a war is going to occur, given a certain set of conditions. The best supercomputer is still like only 20% accurate or something like that. So it's very, very bare bones. And at the start of it, like Aseem was saying, potentially over time, we could see it getting more and more accurate. I don't know how much accuracy I think is ever going to be reached. I think humans are so unpredictable that a lot of the theories are really great for blanket conversations and looking at trends. I don't necessarily know, in my opinion, how well they are at actually predicting things. International relations research specifically is really interesting in that aspect, because you are creating literal probability and calculus equations and using math to try to predict whether or not something is going to happen given a innumerable amount of variables, and you are boiling it down to just a couple things for your research and whenever your paper is on. So it's really interesting to see how AI is going to continue to influence that in terms of making data easier to compact and to study and influencing those equations. But as of right now, there's not really much in the literature that's using AI for that.